I used to spend my whole time thinking, I'm going to spend my whole career saying, if you don't stop catching all the fish, there won't be any fish. Because you had all the scientific evidence, you had all the data coming in that almost every fish stock is overfished in some way. And for me, that seemed crazy. It's like, well, we have the insight and we have the evidence and the data to tell us we should be doing something differently, and we're ignoring it. So I realized then that I probably had to get onto a sort of broader platform to talk about bigger environmental issues and actually the values that underpin our relationship with the environment. It was a long journey, and I went from marine biologist to working as environmental manager for London Transport, looking at greening the tube and the underground and the buses. And then I co-founded the agency I used to work for, Futuro, in 2001. And that was all about the idea of making sustainability so desirable it becomes normal. One of the most radical things we can do is just be quiet and reflect and actually try and get a different perspective on where we're at right now. Because I think the problem is we've built so much momentum up in this narrative of progress that it's very difficult to question the impacts of that progress. The key trends for cities have to be around relocalization of neighborhoods. So we had a kind of tradition of urban planning, which was all about sectoring. So we have an industrial sector here, we have a commercial sector here, and everyone crisscrossing and commuting back and forth and coming inside from out of town. And that is all crazily inefficient. And I think where you're seeing the cities which are really planning their future in a smart way are places like Copenhagen, where they're looking at relocalization of the city, which means you can have access to all the amenities you need, healthcare, education, shopping facilities, post office, all of that, within walking or cycling distance of your house. So it's having that sort of hub-based city system, which ironically is how big cities like London originally evolved. And then you have this sort of hollowing out, because what you've seen in places like Detroit, you have this collapse of the inner city and a flight to the suburbs, and you have a sort of donut effect where the inner city effectively collapses. So I think fixing transport through proper zoning, I think there'll be a lot more urban food cultivation, a lot of more green space, particularly as the world heats up, because we have to mitigate the effect of so much concrete and steel in our cities, which means cities don't cool off at night. So the more green roofs, green spaces, and even hairy buildings, the Malaysian architect Ken Yang talks about buildings which actually have more ecological footprint because they have plants growing out the side than the land they take up. So we could actually increase the amount of green space in our cities. And London, for example, has just become the world's first national park city. And part of the problem we have is that aviation is artificially cheap, because aviation fuel is not taxed. And yet all our other transport fuels are. So aviation has an unfair advantage. So I think, again, we could have, certainly within Europe, some kind of progressive taxation on aviation fuel, which would get us to pay the real cost of flying, and then perhaps use that to subsidize high-speed rail and other types of ground-based transport, which are more environmentally efficient. The key thing, there's a lot of futurists out there who will try and predict. We've all had these ideas of where the world is going to be going. The reason I get frustrated with that is because that tends to predict a future which is an extension of the status quo. I take a slightly different approach, and I like to think about it as stretching the imagination of the possible. So actually trying to look at what disruptive, non-linear changes might occur. And that requires the power of the imagination to imagine things in a very, very different way. So I can see and I can smell and I can taste a world which has risen to the climate change challenge, that has risen to the sort of tragedy of biodiversity loss, that is led by thinking which comes not just from the head, but from the heart and the gut. And I can see green cities. I can see people walking and cycling. I can see people having a much more intimate connection with nature. I can see people valuing the things in life that really matter, which are relationships and those type of links. No, we shouldn't lose hope, but we also have to be open-eyed. This is not a sleepwalking into the darkness type of moment. This is a time to be wide-eyed, open-hearted, you know, and ready for change.